Okay, in this one we're going to look at HDRI maps. So an HDRI map is like a lighting environment that creates ambient light from a real world location, or a photograph or an HDRI map of a real world location. So it gives you a kind of natural lighting ambience that can really enhance a scene, because when we actually see lighting in reality, it's bouncing off a huge number of objects around us, and they're all bouncing different colors and different temperatures of light around. And we're seeing, when we look into our world, we see a result of that, and not just like, the sun and a couple of other lights directly hitting the surfaces. We see all this kind of ambient light. So what we want to do with an HDRI map is we kind of need to apply it a little bit differently. It doesn't come up as like a regular light. We actually apply it in our shader editor. So we go over to our shader editor here. We go into object and we change over to world. And then at the moment we have this kind of background color that's going into the surface of our world output. And you can see that if we mess around with this background color, we get a different kind of different background, and it really affects the lighting and temperature, or the lighting strength in our world, right? So what we want to do here is we want to, rather than use a color in this background node here, we want to create an environment map. So if we hit Shift A and look for environment, Shift A S, ENV, environment texture, we can plug this into our color, and you'll immediately see it goes pink because there's no file being referenced here. So if you ever see pink things happening in your, like weird pink stuff happening in your scene, it's generally because there's a texture missing. So that's always a good reason to make sure you've got all your textures saved with your files, or in a location that's moving around with your files. If you're taking stuff into uni on USBs and things, compiling all of your stuff into one folder so that you can drag and drop it onto your desktop, and everything's going to be there when you're using it, so you don't have errors like this, texture errors like this. Moving along. We need an environment texture, so we need an HDRI map, high dynamic range image, is what HDRI stands for. So that means the kind of image you would get out of a camera, like a RAW file or an EXR file, or in this case they're called HDRIs. But you can use any lighting map that's configured correctly in EXR format or HDRI format. So the best place I find to get this from is from Polyhaven. Go down to HDRIs here, and you can find a whole ton of different HDRIs, from interior, exterior, very neutral, very very intense lighting environments. A whole bunch of different ones, and these are all Creative Commons licensed and free, so you can just download them and use them. So let's grab an interior environment here, and we will download the EXR. So we'll just click on download there. 4K will be plenty. So download, click on that. It will slowly download. We probably want to put that in a folder. I tend to make a folder on my computer in my documents called resources, where I store all my texture downloads. I'll store 3D asset downloads, and I'll store HDRI downloads. But for now, I'll just grab it from my downloads folder. So I'll go open downloads, and then I will grab, where are we? Polyhaven Studio, that one. So if I chuck that in here, you're going to see that we get this HDRI map, this studio map. Now, if you switch back to your regular viewport, it won't take this into account unless you switch over to Scene World and Scene Lights. But we want to be doing most of our rendering in the viewport shading view anyway, because that is where we're going to get our most accurate representation of what our render output is going to be. Cool. So we have our Polyhaven Studio here, and it's going into our background. We can turn it up or down if we want to let in more or less lighting. But you'll see one thing that is very annoying already, and that's that we have this lighting environment in the background here. And now if you frame up your camera shot just right, you may frame, or maybe we get rid of this get rid of this boolean and we just have a blank background there, then that's fine. But if you are getting an issue where you're seeing your HDRI map and you don't necessarily want to see your HDRI map, then there are ways to negate that. But first, I'll just show you a quick way of being able to rotate the environment around, because that's probably the first thing you're going to want to do with a setup like this. Okay, let's just turn all this off. So what I'm doing here, and I'll explain this again in another video, is this is turning it off in the viewport, and this is turning it off in the render view. So just be aware that when things have a camera beside them, they're going to show up in your renders, even if they're not showing up in the viewport. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to rotate our vector map, or our environment map. So the easiest way to do this is to search for a vector rotate node and just plug that in the top here. And then we want to also find our texture coordinates. Okay, so yeah, this is the setup you want. You want to have your generated, you get your texture coordinates node and a vector rotate node, plug your generated vector texture coordinates into this the top vector input of this vector rotate node, and then plug the vector itself into the vector, or the outcoming vector into your vector input of your environment texture. Now what this is doing is it's taking the coordinates for the UV map that are generated by Blender. So it's like kind of taking this environment here, and it's allowing us to rotate those based on this angle here. So now you can actually rotate in place your lighting and see the result that actually has on your scene. So if you kind of cut out the rest of that there, you can see we can kind of like prototype these different lighting situations by just rotating around an environment map, which is very handy. So the next little thing I wanted to talk about is what I mentioned before, like how do we get rid of this lighting environment? Sometimes if you have like a really nice sky, then that can be great to use because you can kind of see the top of the sky and things like that, and you can see the clouds, and it'll actually make your environment a lot more immersive. But with something like this, maybe we want just a solid color outside of our back window, or we don't want to be able to see our environment out the back. So we need to like play some tricks on the renderer essentially. So I'm going to take this background node and I'm going to copy and paste it, and I'm going to turn the background black. And then we're going to mix between these two shaders here. So if I look for mix shader, we are going to plug this background, our environment map, into the top, this black background into the bottom, and then we're going to plug that into our shader here. And you can see as I go from factor of 0, it's going to take the top input. If I go to a factor of 1, it's going to take the bottom input. So what we need to do is we need to control this factor based on like what, whether or not a light ray is actually hitting something. So if a light ray is like hitting a surface, we want to see the result of our lighting environment. And if a light ray is just going straight through and hitting nothing, then we want to just see black or some other color. So there's a node for that. So if I look, if I search for the light path node, we can basically say like, is it a camera ray? Like what are we looking at here? The rays being cast from our camera. So if it's a ray being cast from our camera, we're going to see the background, and if that ray being cast by our camera isn't hitting anything at all, we're going to see this black background here. So yeah, that's a good way of just eliminating that background, or actually replacing this background, say, with another different lighting environment. So we could actually, let's say we want to try and set that up so that we can see like the sky from the background. So maybe we'll grab like, yeah, this nice kind of clear sky here. Let's download that. Wait for that to download. Probably by the time I copy and paste that, it'll be finished. So we'll copy and paste this, plug that into our environment color here, and then instead of using this map we've got in here, we can delete that map, open a new map, go to our downloads and select the Klufendal clear pure sky here, open that up, and now we have this kind of like outside environment that's not actually, we're not actually seeing the result of that lighting environment because we've still got this indoor lighting environment that's actually lighting our scene. But in the background of our window, for example, we're seeing some soft clouds, and we can mess around. We can mess around with the angle a little bit to try and get, the right kind of lighting result. We can also change over to kind of to allow ourselves to rotate things a little bit more. So we can change over to like an Euler lighting. Euler rotation, and that means we can rotate all of the axes individually. Just say if we want to kind of like look at certain different parts of that outdoor environment, depending on how we've got our camera framed. Sometimes like we're kind of seeing a reflection of the sea or something here, which is maybe not what we want. So maybe we want it to be a little bit more like distant cloud on the horizon and not kind of we basically want to be able to configure this so that we don't see anything strange outside our window, essentially. That's the kind of the gist, I guess, of setting up a lighting environment in your world view here, so that you can combine both HDRI maps and specific in-scene lighting to create like very bespoke rendering results.